CUDA cores or stream processors. If your CPU has a few strong workers lifting heavy boxes, your GPU has thousands of tiny workers passing buckets down a line. Those tiny workers are called CUDA cores on NVIDIA cards and stream processors on AMD cards. Different names, same job. They crunch numbers, and they do it in massive groups all at once. A mid-range GPU might have a couple thousand of them. A high-end one, over 16,000. The reason GPUs need so many is because graphics work is highly repetitive. Millions of pixels all need similar math done to them at the same time. Instead of one big brain solving problems one by one, the GPU throws an army of small brains at the problem all at once. More cores generally means more raw power, but only if the rest of the card can keep up. VRAM. VRAM stands for video RAM, and it's the GPU's own personal chunk of memory, completely separate from your system RAM. This is where the GPU stores everything it needs quick access to. Textures, frame data, geometry, lighting maps, all the visual information that makes up what you see on screen. The more VRAM you have, the more data the GPU can hold without constantly going back and forth to slower storage. At 1080p, 8 GB is usually plenty. At 4K, with high-resolution textures and mods stacked on top, even 12 GB can start to feel tight. VRAM also comes in different types: GDDR6, GDDR6X, and the newer GDDR7. Each generation is faster than the last, which means data moves in and out quicker. Think of VRAM like a desk. The bigger it is, the more work your GPU can spread out and handle without slowing down. Memory bus width and bandwidth. Memory bus width is the road between your GPU and its VRAM. A 128-bit bus is like a 2-lane road, fine for light traffic. A 256-bit bus is a highway. A 384-bit bus, that's a full-on autobahn. The wider the bus, the more data can travel at once. But width alone doesn't tell the whole story. What really matters is bandwidth, which is the total amount of data the GPU can move per second. Bandwidth is determined by the bus width combined with the memory speed. So a card with a narrow bus but very fast memory might match the bandwidth of a card with a wider bus and slower memory. Where this really shows up is at higher resolutions. 4K pushes a lot of data, and if the bandwidth can't keep up, the GPU stalls waiting for information. When you see a card with tons of VRAM but a narrow 128-bit bus, that's a red flag. It's like having a massive warehouse connected by a single dirt road. Quick question, what GPU are you running? Let me know in the comments. Clock speed. Clock speed on a GPU works a lot like it does on a CPU. It's how fast each core ticks through its work, measured in megahertz. Every GPU has 2 clock speeds, a base clock and a boost clock. The base clock is the guaranteed minimum, the speed the card runs at under normal conditions. The boost clock is the higher speed the GPU reaches when it has enough power and isn't overheating. Think of it like cruise control versus flooring it on an empty highway. The card speeds up when it can and backs off when it needs to. But here's the thing, clock speed matters less on a GPU than it does on a CPU, because GPUs rely on thousands of cores working together. Core count and architecture design usually have a bigger impact than raw speed. Architecture and process node. Architecture is the blueprint of how a GPU is built, how its cores are organized, how data flows, and what features it supports. NVIDIA's Ada Lovelace, AMD's RDNA 3, Intel's Battlemage, these are all architecture names, and each one represents a different design philosophy. 2 cards can have similar core counts and clock speeds, but perform very differently because of how their architectures handle work behind the scenes. Tied to architecture is the process node, the size of the transistors on the chip, measured in nanometers. Smaller transistors mean more of them fit on the same chip, and they tend to use less power and produce less heat. Going from a 7-nanometer design to a 4-nanometer one doesn't just make the chip a little better, it often results in a significant jump in both performance and efficiency. That's why architecture upgrades usually matter more than raw spec bumps. RT cores. Ray tracing is a way of simulating how light behaves in the real world, bouncing off surfaces, casting shadows, reflecting in mirrors, passing through glass. It looks incredible, but it's also extremely demanding. Doing all that light math on regular GPU cores would tank your performance. That's where RT cores come in. They're dedicated hardware built specifically to handle ray tracing calculations. NVIDIA calls them RT cores. AMD calls them ray accelerators. Both do the same thing. Take the heavy ray tracing workload off the regular cores so the card doesn't grind to a halt. Even with dedicated hardware, ray tracing is still one of the most demanding things a GPU can do. That's why it's almost always paired with some form of upscaling technology to keep frame rates playable. Without RT cores, enabling ray tracing in a modern game would drop your frames so hard, the game would feel like a slideshow. Tensor cores and AI upscaling. Tensor cores are specialized processors on the GPU designed to handle AI and machine learning tasks at high speed. For most people, the biggest benefit is AI upscaling. Technologies like NVIDIA's DLSS, AMD's FSR, and Intel's XeSS. The idea is simple. Instead of rendering a game at full resolution, the GPU renders it at a lower resolution and then uses AI to reconstruct the missing detail. The result looks almost identical to full resolution, but runs significantly faster because the GPU is doing less brute force rendering. It's like sketching a rough draft and having an AI artist fill in the fine details for you. Tensor cores are also used outside of gaming. Things like AI image generation, video generation, and machine learning workloads. Not every GPU has tensor cores, but cards that do tend to handle AI-related tasks much more efficiently. Tflops. Tflops stands for teraflops, and it measures how many trillions of floating point operations the GPU can perform per second. In plain terms, it's a raw number that tells you how much math the GPU can crunch. Higher Tflops generally means more compute power, and you'll often see this number in marketing material as a headline spec. But here's the catch. Tflops is only a useful comparison within the same architecture. A 30 Tflops card from one generation might trade blows with a 15 Tflops card from a newer generation. It's like comparing two cars by horsepower alone. One might have more on paper, but the other is lighter and handles better. Treat Tflops as a rough indicator, not a scoreboard. TDP. TDP stands for thermal design power, and just like with CPUs, it tells you roughly how much heat the GPU puts out under load, measured in watts. But GPU TDP numbers tend to be much higher. A mid-range card might sit around 150 to 200 watts. A high-end card can pull over 350. That's a lot of heat, which means you need good airflow, a decent cooler, and a power supply that can actually handle the load. Modern GPUs also need dedicated power cables from your PSU. Older cards used 6 or 8-pin connectors, while newer high-end models use the 12-volt high power or 12-volt 2x6 connector, which handles more power through a single cable. Every new generation tends to get either more powerful at the same wattage or more power hungry for more performance, sometimes both. If you pair a high TDP card with a weak power supply, expect shutdowns, crashes, or a very unhappy system. TMUs and ROPs. TMUs and ROPs are two specs that almost never make it into marketing material, but they're working hard behind the scenes every time your GPU renders a frame. TMUs, texture mapping units, take flat images, called textures, and wrap them onto 3D surfaces. Every wall, floor, character skin, and blade of grass you see in a game has a texture applied by the TMUs. ROPs, render output units, handle the final step, taking all the process data and turning it into the actual pixels on your monitor. More TMUs means textures get applied faster. More ROPs means the card can push more pixels per cycle, which matters most at higher resolutions. Both usually scale with the core count. A GPU with more CUDA cores or stream processors will typically have more TMUs and ROPs as well. You rarely need to compare these directly, but if two cards seem similar on paper and one performs better at 4K, the ROP count might be the reason. PCIe version. Peripheral Component Interconnect Express is the connection between your GPU and your motherboard. It's the data highway that everything flows through, from game assets to compute tasks. PCIe 3.0 offered around 16 gigabytes per second on a 16-lane slot. PCIe 4.0 doubled that, and PCIe 5.0 doubles it again. Most modern GPUs use PCIe 4.0. That said, if you're building a new system, having PCIe 4.0 or 5.0 support gives you headroom for future cards that might demand more.